Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku ate the power fruit. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The wind that whipped across the rooftop felt like a personal affront. It was cold, sharp, and indifferent, tugging at the straps of his yellow backpack and rustling the singed pages of his notebook, Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. The book felt impossibly heavy now, each meticulously drawn costume and catalogued quirk a monument to a lifetime of wasted effort. Izuku Midoriya stood on the asphalt rooftop, the city sprawling below him in a dizzying panorama of life and light, and felt nothing. The vibrant pulse of Muzudafu, a place he had always loved for its constant, simmering potential for heroism, was now just a dull, muted thrum. The world had been drained of its color, leaving behind a grayscale reality painted in shades of failure. He had met his idol. He had met All Might, and All Might had taken the fragile, flickering candle of his dream and snuffed it out between a thumb and forefinger. It's not wrong to dream. However, you need to be realistic. The words weren't cruel. That was the worst part. They were delivered with a weary kindness, the gentle letdown of a parent explaining a harsh truth. There was no malice in All Might's voice, only a profound, sad finality. It was the same tone the doctor had used all those years ago, pointing at the X-ray of his foot, at the extra joint in his pinky toe that served as a tombstone for a future that would never be. Sorry, kid. It's not gonna happen. He clutched the railing, his knuckles white. The metal was cold, grounding him in the terrible present. He could still see the puff of steam from All Might's mouth, could still feel the phantom weight of his hero's hand on his shoulder before he leaped away, leaving Izuku alone with the echoing silence and the shattered pieces of his heart. He'd asked the question he'd been desperate to ask his entire life. Can I be a hero, even without a quirk? For a single, breathtaking moment, he had seen something flicker in All Might's eyes. A conflict. A memory. But it had been extinguished as quickly as it came, replaced by the grim visage of practicality. The symbol of peace, the man whose smile saved countless lives, had looked at Izuku Midoriya and seen not a potential successor, but a liability. A civilian to be protected, not a comrade to fight alongside. He finally let go of the railing and turned, his movements stiff and robotic. He walked to the door, descended the concrete stairs, and emerged back onto the street. The sounds of the city rushed back in, the rumble of traffic, the chatter of pedestrians, the distant wail of a siren. It was all just noise. He started walking, with no destination in mind, his feet carrying him on a path paved with 2 decades of whispered apologies and scornful laughter. You're quirkless? I'm so sorry, Izuku! I'm so sorry! His mother's tears, a balm that had unknowingly watered the seeds of his inadequacy. You're worse than the rest of these damn extras, Deku! You're a pebble on the side of the road. Kaken's voice, a constant, explosive reminder of the gulf between them. He walked for what felt like hours. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink that he couldn't appreciate. His path had led him away from the bustling city center, toward the coast. The air grew thick with the smell of salt and decay. He knew this place. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. It had been a beautiful spot once, he remembered his mother telling him. A place for families and first dates. Now, it was a testament to neglect. Mountains of rusted metal, broken appliances, and discarded furniture rose from the sand like grotesque, man-made mesas. The waves that lapped at the shore were murky, carrying plastic bags and other refuse. The entire beach was a landfill, an open sore on the coastline, forgotten by the city it served. It was perfect. He trudged onto the sand, his sneakers sinking into the filth-strewn shore. He found a relatively clear spot next to a mountain of discarded tires and slumped down, his back against the rubber. He shrugged off his backpack, letting it fall with a heavy thud. He pulled out the notebook, its cover still slightly damp and warped from its brief time in the koi pond. He stared at the heroic, toothy grin of All Might that he had drawn on the first page. It felt like a mockery now. Tears, hot and thick, finally began to fall. They traced clean paths through the grime on his cheeks. He wasn't sobbing loudly like he had as a child. This was a silent, gut-wrenching grief, the kind that comes when you're mourning a death. And something had died today, The most important part of him. The part that believed. He stayed there as the twilight deepened, letting the despair wash over him. It was a cold, heavy tide, much like the one before him. His dreams were just another piece of trash on this forgotten beach, useless, broken, ready to be swallowed by the sea and forgotten. He felt hollow, a vessel emptied of purpose. A gnawing, empty hunger began to twist in his stomach, but it wasn't for food. It was a hunger for something to fill the void All Might had left behind. His unfocused gaze drifted over the heaps of junk. A shattered television screen. A car door, pockmarked with rust. A tangled mess of fishing nets. And then, something else. It was nestled in a small alcove formed by a crushed washing machine and a pile of driftwood. Amidst the muted tones of rust and rot, it was a splash of vivid, impossible color. A deep, royal purple. Curiosity, a long-dormant instinct, stirred within him. He pushed himself to his feet, his legs aching, and walked towards it. As he got closer, he saw that it was a fruit. It was shaped like a large, stylized teardrop, and its skin was covered in swirling, hypnotic patterns, like the eddies in a river. It seemed to pulse with a faint, internal light, a bizarre and unnatural object in a place defined by decay. It looked utterly alien, yet strangely organic. There was no stem, no leaf, no sign that it had ever been attached to a plant. It was just there. He reached out a hesitant hand and picked it up. The skin was smooth but firm, and it was surprisingly heavy for its size. A strange, low-level energy seemed to hum against his palm, a faint vibration that traveled up his arm. He turned it over and over, his analytical mind, for the first time all day, kicking into gear. What is it? Some kind of exotic import? A new species? A bizarre mutation caused by the pollution? He'd never seen anything like it in any biology book. He brought it closer to his nose and sniffed. There was no scent. No sweet aroma, no hint of citrus or rot. It smelled of nothing, which was somehow more unsettling than a bad smell. He stood there, holding the bizarre fruit as the last vestiges of sunlight vanished from the horizon. The world was now draped in the deep blue of early evening, and in his hand, this purple object seemed to glow even brighter. What was he supposed to do now? Go home? Face his mother? Pretend that his entire world hadn't just collapsed? He couldn't. He couldn't go back to his room, surrounded by All Might posters that now felt like accusations. He couldn't go back to being the same old useless, quirkless Deku. He looked from the fruit to the dark, churning ocean. He thought about Kaken's words from earlier that day, a cruel joke that now echoed with a sinister possibility. If you want to be a hero so bad, why don't you take a swan dive off the roof and pray for a quirk in your next life? He shuddered. No. He wasn't thinking that. But the despair was a physical thing, a weight in his chest. What did anything matter anymore? His path was a dead end. His life was a footnote. He looked down at the fruit again. It was the only thing in the world that felt real, that felt new. A deviation from the script. Maybe it's poisonous, a dark, insidious thought whispered in the back of his mind. Maybe that's for the best. The thought didn't scare him as much as it should have. It was a bleak, logical next step in a day full of bleak logic. In a moment of pure, unadulterated nihilism, driven by a despair so profound it bordered on madness, he made a decision. He wasn't trying to die. He wasn't trying to live. He was just acting, a final, meaningless gesture in a meaningless world. He raised the fruit to his lips. Without a second thought, he bit into it. The sensation was immediate and overwhelmingly vile. If one could distill the essence of everything foul in the world and concentrate it into a single flavor, it would be this. It was the taste of spoiled, century-old medicine, mixed with the acrid tang of battery acid and the slimy bitterness of rotten seaweed. It coated his tongue, his teeth, the roof of his mouth, with a texture like gritty, rancid oil. It was a flavor that bypassed taste buds and registered directly in the brain as a full-body violation. His entire body revolted. He gagged, his stomach heaving, threatening to expel the offending substance. Tears sprang to his eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer, soul-crushing disgust of the taste. He wanted to spit it out, to claw the taste from his mouth, but the same desperate, nihilistic impulse that had made him bite it in the first place urged him on. He forced his throat to work, swallowing the pulpy, disgusting mouthful. It went down like a lump of gravel. He dropped the rest of the fruit, which landed silently in the sand. He doubled over, coughing and sputtering, his hands on his knees. The taste lingered, a phantom poison on his tongue. He waited for the pain, for the sickness, for his body to shut down. For a long, agonizing minute, nothing happened. The world was just the sound of his own ragged breathing and the foul taste in his mouth. So it wasn't poisonous, he thought with a strange mix of disappointment and relief. Just disgusting. How fitting. Then it began. It started in his stomach, a warmth that was nothing like the burn of indigestion. It was a clean, pure heat, like swallowing a tiny sun. The warmth spread outward, flowing through his veins like molten gold, chasing away the bone-deep chill of his despair. It moved into his chest, his shoulders, down his arms and into his fingertips. It poured down his spine, into his legs, all the way to the soles of his feet. Every cell in his body seemed to wake up. His muscles, usually soft and unremarkable, felt like they were contracting and expanding, being rewoven with steel cables. The hum he had felt in his palm was now a roaring current thrumming through his entire being. He could feel his own heartbeat, not as a faint thud, but as a powerful, resonant drumbeat echoing in his ears. His senses exploded. He could hear individual grains of sand shifting in the wind. He could smell the ozone in the salty air. He could see the distant city lights with a crystalline clarity he'd never known. He felt strong. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a fact, as solid and real as the ground beneath his feet. He felt an incredible, impossible wellspring of raw, physical power bubbling up inside him, a reservoir of strength that had never been there before. The sudden influx of sensation and power was disorienting. His proprioception was a mess. His body felt both lighter and denser at the same time. He took a step back, trying to process the overwhelming sensory data, and his foot caught on a piece of rebar sticking out of the sand. He stumbled backward, flailing his arms for balance. His trajectory was taking him directly towards a large, discarded refrigerator, its white enamel paint peeling to reveal patches of orange rust. It was an old, heavy model, the kind that took two strong men to move. Instinct took over. He threw his left hand out behind him to break his fall, to brace himself against the metal surface. He expected his hand to slap against the door, to feel the jarring impact travel up his arm. What happened instead was surreal. His palm connected with the refrigerator door with a sound that wasn't a slap, but a dull, sickening thump crunch. There was no jarring impact. His hand didn't stop. The metal of the door folded around his fingers and palm as if it were aluminum foil. He felt the insulation inside give way, the inner plastic wall shattering. His hand sank a good 4 inches into the body of the refrigerator before his momentum finally stopped. He froze, his body still half fallen, his hand embedded in the appliance. His mind struggled to catch up with reality. He stared, wide-eyed, at the mangled metal. A perfect, 5-fingered indentation was pressed deep into the door, the edges of the steel warped and torn. Slowly, carefully, he pulled his hand out. It was completely unharmed. Not a scratch, not a bruise. He flexed his fingers, which moved with a newfound, terrifying fluidity. He looked from his perfectly normal-looking hand back to the crushed refrigerator. He had done that. He, Izuka Midoriya, had punched his hand through solid steel without even trying. The warmth in his veins now felt like a raging fire. Panic began to set in, cold and sharp, a stark contrast to the power coursing through him. What was this? What had that fruit done to him? Was this a quirk? But that was impossible. The doctor, the X-ray, the extra joint, it was medically, genetically impossible. Boom! A distant explosion ripped through the air, shaking the ground beneath his feet. It came from the direction of the shopping district he had wandered through earlier. An orange glow lit up the sky, followed by the panicked screams of civilians. His body tensed. A villain attack. His first thought was a conditioned response. The heroes will handle it. He should run. Get away. He was just a civilian, but his second thought was new, colored by the terrifying power now humming under his skin. He felt a pull, an instinct he'd always had but had never been able to act on. The urge to run towards the danger. He started walking, then jogging, then breaking into a full sprint. And the world became a blur. The ground seemed to rush beneath his feet. He wasn't just running, he was devouring the distance, each stride covering 10, then 20 feet. The beach, which had taken him ages to cross, was behind him in seconds. He vaulted over a junk pile with an effortless leap that sent him soaring 15 feet into the air. He landed with a soft thud, the sand barely crunching under his sneakers. This wasn't the clumsy, desperate run of a fanboy. This was the movement of something superhuman. He reached the street and didn't slow down. He weaved through the evening traffic, the cars looking like they were standing still. Horns blared at the green and black blur that shot past them. He could feel the wind whipping past his face, the exhilarating, terrifying rush of speed. He arrived at the source of the commotion in under a minute. It was a narrow street lined with shops, now a scene of chaos. Fire licked at the side of a building, and heroes were holding a perimeter, keeping the crowd back. And in the center of it all, he saw a sight that made his blood run cold. It was him. The sludge villain. The same one that had attacked him earlier, the one All Might had captured in a soda bottle. He was free, and he was larger, more violent than before. And he had a hostage, a boy with spiky, ash-blonde hair, thrashing and struggling, small explosions popping uselessly from his palms. Kaken. Izuku's world narrowed to that single, horrifying image. Bakugo, his childhood friend, his tormentor, the person he measured his own worth against, was suffocating. His eyes were wide with a terror Izuku had never seen on his face before. He was clawing at the viscous green sludge that was forcing its way down his throat, his explosions becoming weaker and weaker. The pro-heroes were helpless. Kamui Woods couldn't get a grip with his branches. Death Arms was strong, but he couldn't land a solid blow on the villain's fluid body. Backdraft was busy containing the fires. They were all shouting, strategizing, but doing nothing. They were waiting for someone with the right quirk. Izuku watched, his heart pounding in his chest, a frantic drumbeat against the roaring fire of his newfound power. He saw the desperation in Bakugo's eyes. He saw the hero's paralysis, and his body moved before his brain could protest. He burst through the crowd, ignoring their shouts of "Get back!" And it's not safe. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have a strategy. All he had was the singular, all-consuming drive to save the boy who was drowning in front of him. In the original timeline, his hand would have gone to his backpack. He would have thrown it, a desperate, futile gesture to create a distraction. This time, his instincts were different. They were primal. He needed a tool. He needed a weapon. His eyes darted around, and his gaze fell on a metal lamppost cemented into the sidewalk a few feet away. He didn't slow down. As he ran past it, he reached out, his fingers wrapping around the cool, thick metal pole. He didn't try to pull. He just willed it to come with him. There was a high-pitched, tearing screech of tortured metal and a violent crack of shattering concrete. The lamppost, base and all, was ripped clean from the ground, trailing dust and chunks of pavement. It was at least 15 feet long and weighed several hundred pounds, but in his hands, it felt no heavier than a baseball bat. The pro-heroes stared, their jaws agape. The crowd gasped. For a split second, the entire chaotic scene froze. A scrawny kid in a middle school uniform was charging a monster, wielding a city lamppost like a club. Izuku didn't notice their shock. His focus was absolute. He was still several yards away from the villain, but he was closing fast. He swung the massive pole in a wide, horizontal arc. The sheer mass of it, combined with his impossible speed, created a hurricane of displaced air. The swing wasn't aimed to kill or to capture. It was aimed at Bakugo's face. The end of the lamppost connected with the sludge villain with a wet, percussive splat. It was like hitting a water balloon with a sledgehammer. The impact sent a massive portion of the villain's viscous body flying away from Bakugo, splattering against the wall of a nearby building. For the first time in minutes, Bakugo's head was clear. He gasped, taking a desperate, ragged lungful of air, his body racked with coughs. The villain shrieked, a sound of rage and pain, as its form recoiled from the massive blow. It had been distracted. It was furious, But the opening was there. "I am here!" The voice boomed through the street like a thunderclap. All Might, in his magnificent, muscular form, landed between Izuku and the villain. He had a look on his face Izuku had never seen before, not the confident smile, but a look of profound shock and grim determination, his eyes flicking from the struggling Bakugo to the panting, lamppost-wielding boy he had lectured not an hour ago. The sight of the quirkless boy's impossible heroism had shaken him from his stupor. It had reminded him of the most important tenet of being a hero, to act. Texas. Smash! All Might's punch was a force of nature. It hit the sludge villain with the force of a jet engine, the air pressure alone scattering the villain's body into 1,000 slimy droplets. The sky, which had been darkening, suddenly cleared as the punch changed the weather itself. It started to rain. Silence fell over the street, broken only by the gentle patter of raindrops and Bakugo's harsh coughing. The villain was gone, defeated. The aftermath was a blur. The press swarmed, their cameras flashing. The other heroes, their faces a mixture of embarrassment and relief, rushed forward, not to Izuku, but to Bakugo. They praised his resilience, his strong quirk, his brave struggle. Izuku was ignored. He dropped the lamppost, which clattered to the asphalt with a deafening clang that seemed to shake the whole street. He looked at his hands, which were trembling violently. The fire inside him was still there, but now it was laced with a cold, terrifying dread. What had he done? He hadn't just used some new power. He had torn public property from the ground and wielded it as a weapon in the middle of a city street. He was a vigilante. He had broken the law. He had to get out of there. Before anyone could turn their attention to him, he slipped back into the bewildered crowd, pulling the hood of his sweatshirt over his head. He moved quickly, turning down a side street and then another, putting as much distance as possible between himself and the scene. He finally stumbled into a dark, narrow alleyway between two apartment buildings, the stench of overflowing dumpsters filling the air. He leaned against the cold, damp brick wall, his legs giving out. He slid down to the ground, pulling his knees to his chest. His heart was hammering against his ribs, and his breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. He had power. Real, terrifying, world-breaking power. And he had no idea what it was, where it came from, or how to control it. Was he a hero? Or was he a monster who just got lucky? He was so lost in his panic that he didn't hear the footsteps until they stopped right in front of him. A massive shadow fell over him, blocking out the dim light from the street. Izuku looked up, his eyes wide with fear. It was All Might. But not the smiling, muscular symbol of peace. It was the other one. The skeletal, emaciated man with hollowed eyes and a trickle of blood at the corner of his mouth. Tashinori Yagi. He looked down at Izuku, his expression unreadable. It wasn't anger. It wasn't disappointment. It was a deep, searching, and utterly serious gravity. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the drip of water from a leaky pipe and the distant sirens. Finally, All Might broke the silence, his voice a low, rough rasp that held none of its usual booming confidence. He didn't start with a scolding. He didn't start with praise. He started with a statement, repeating the words that had started this whole chain of events, but this time they held a completely different weight. "I told you," he began, his gaze intense, "that you couldn't be a hero without a quirk." He took a half-step closer, crouching down so he was closer to Izuku's level. The boy was trembling, staring at his own hands as if they were venomous snakes. All Might's eyes bored into him, searching for an answer to a question that defied all logic, all known science of their world. "Young man, I need you to tell me the truth." He paused, his voice dropping to a near whisper, heavy with the weight of an impossible reality. What was that? The alleyway was a cocoon of shadow and stench, but for Izuku Midoriya, it was a sanctuary. Here, hidden from the judging eyes of the world, he could fall apart. The adrenaline from the fight, from the impossible feat of ripping a lamppost from its foundations, was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep tremor that had nothing to do with the evening chill. He sat huddled against the brick wall, staring at his hands. They looked the same as they always had, a little callous from years of frantic note-taking, the nails bitten to the quick. They did not look like hands that could bend steel. He was so consumed by his own internal chaos that the sudden appearance of the skeletal man at the alley's mouth felt like a phantom conjured from his own spiraling thoughts. All Might, or rather, the man beneath the myth. His presence was less a boom and more a silent pressure drop, sucking the air from the narrow space. His question hung between them, sharp and heavy as a guillotine's blade. What was that? Izuku's throat was dry. He tried to speak, but only a choke squeak emerged. He swallowed hard, the foul, phantom taste of the mysterious fruit still clinging to the back of his tongue. He had to answer. This was All Might. The man to whom he had just bared his quirkless soul. The man who had witnessed his inexplicable transformation. I don't know, he whispered, the words small and fragile. All Might's hollowed eyes narrowed, studying him with an intensity that was far more intimidating than his heroic glare. Young man, that was not the desperate flailing I saw earlier today. That was not a boy running on adrenaline. I saw you rip a cast-iron lamppost from 3 feet of concrete. I saw you swing it like it was a twig. That is a display of top-tier, strength-enhancing quirk. A powerful one. He took a step closer, his voice dropping. So, I will ask you again. Were you lying to me on that rooftop? The accusation, though softly spoken, struck Izuku like a physical blow. No! The word burst out of him, loud and desperate. Never! I would never lie to you, All Might. I am quirkless. The doctor said so. I have the extra joint in my toe. I never showed any signs ever. He scrambled to his feet, fumbling to pull his backpack around. He unzipped it with trembling fingers and yanked out his student ID, thrusting it forward. Look! It says right here. Quirk, none! It's official. It's my whole life. All Might took the card, his long, thin fingers dwarfing it. He glanced at it, then back at Izuku's frantic, tear-streaked face. He saw no deception there, only pure, unadulterated panic and confusion. He handed the card back. Then explain, he said, his tone softening slightly, shifting from interrogation to investigation. Everything. From the moment I left you on that roof, and so, it all came tumbling out. Izuku explained the crushing weight of his words, the feeling of his world ending. He described his aimless wandering, the path that led him to the polluted shores of Dagoba Beach. His voice cracked as he recounted the utter despair that had settled over him, the feeling of being just another piece of trash in a world that had no use for him. And then I saw it, he said, his eyes unfocused as he recalled the image. This fruit. It was purple, with these weird swirls all over it. It was glowing, almost. It didn't look real. He gestured with his hands, trying to describe the teardrop's shape, the unnatural perfection of it. All Might listened, his expression growing more and more perplexed. A fruit? I was hungry, Izuku mumbled, a half-truth that felt simpler than explaining the complex cocktail of despair and nihilism that had guided his hand. I was just not thinking. I picked it up and I ate it. He shuddered, a full-body convulsion, as the memory of the taste assaulted him. It was the worst thing I've ever tasted in my life. It was so disgusting I almost threw up. I thought it had to be poisonous. For a second, I thought, maybe that was okay. He trailed off, ashamed to admit the darkness of that thought to his idol. But it wasn't poison, he continued, his voice gaining momentum as he reached the impossible part. A few seconds later, I felt this warmth. It spread everywhere, and then it was like a dam broke inside me. I could feel this. He held up his trembling hands. This power. It was just there. I felt strong. So strong it scared me. I tripped, and I put my hand out to stop myself from falling against an old fridge, and my hand, it just went right through the door. He looked up at All Might, his eyes pleading for an answer, for some sort of rational explanation for the madness that had become his reality. And then I heard the explosion. I saw Kaken, and my legs just started moving. But this time, when I ran, the world just blurred. And the lamppost. I just grabbed it, and it came right out of the ground. I didn't even feel how heavy it was until I dropped it. He finished his story, panting, his chest heaving. The alley was silent again. All Might stood perfectly still, his skeletal frame looking frail in the dim light. But his mind was racing, turning over every impossible detail of the boy's story. A quirk-granting object. It was the stuff of pre-quirk comic books, of fantasy novels. In the modern world, power was genetic. It was a biological function, coded into one's DNA. It manifested, it was trained, it was a part of you. It wasn't something you could find on a beach and eat. And yet, he had seen the results with his own eyes. The boy's story, as outlandish as it was the only explanation that fit the facts. He had been a normal, quirkless boy an hour ago. Now he possessed strength that could rival some of the strongest pro-heroes. A late-blooming quirk, perhaps? All Might mused aloud, more to himself than to Izuku. Triggered by extreme emotional distress and the ingestion of a specific, unknown chemical catalyst from this fruit? It was a stretch, a massive one, but it was the only hypothesis that fit within the known laws of biology. Still, it felt flimsy. The power Izuku described wasn't a developing quirk. It was a fully formed, massive power that had appeared in an instant. He looked at the boy, who was watching him with the desperate hope of a lost child. He had trusted him with his secret. Now, it was All Might's turn. This situation, this impossible variable, had changed everything. His search for a successor had just become infinitely more complicated, and infinitely more focused on the trembling boy standing before him. "Come with me, young Midoriya," All Might said, his voice regaining a sliver of its command. "We cannot speak here." He led Izuku out of the alley and through a labyrinth of backstreets, moving with a surprising swiftness. They ended up at the emergency stairwell of a nondescript office building. Without a word they climbed. The flights of stairs were dizzying, but Izuku found he wasn't winded. His body felt energized, a thrumming engine of potential. They emerged onto another rooftop. This one was clean, flat, and empty, offering a breathtaking, panoramic view of the city lights twinkling against the deepening night. It was a stark contrast to the rooftop where Izuku's dream had died. This one felt like a place of secrets, a stage for revelations. All Might walked to the edge and looked out over the city he protected. "I owe you an apology, young Midoriya. And an explanation." He turned to face Izuku. "What you saw in that alley, my form, is the real me these days." Suddenly, with a sickening puff of steam, the skeletal man was gone. In his place stood the colossal, muscular form of All Might, his signature smile fixed on his face, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "This," he said, his voice booming, "is just me flexing. Sucking in my gut and puffing out my chest, like any guy at the pool." He held the form for a moment before another, larger cloud of steam erupted from his body. When it cleared, the emaciated Tashinori Yagi stood there once more, wiping a fresh trickle of blood from his lips with the back of his hand. He lifted his shirt. Izuku gasped. The left side of All Might's torso was a horrific, sprawling scar. A vortex of ruined flesh, puckered and discolored, centered on a deep, crater-like indentation. It looked as though something had tried to scoop out his insides. "Pretty gross, right?" All Might said with a grim humor that didn't land. "I got this in a fight 5 years ago. My respiratory system was nearly destroyed, and I lost my entire stomach. The surgeries have worn me down, and they couldn't fix everything. Now I can only do my hero work for about 3 hours a day. The rest of the time, I'm this." Izuku stared, horrified and awestruck. The number one hero, the invincible symbol of peace, was secretly and critically wounded. It explained so much, his decreasing public appearances, the way he sometimes seemed to vanish after a big fight. "You asked me if you could be a hero without a quirk," All Might continued, his voice heavy with the weight of his secret. "And I told you no. I told you that because the world of pro-heroism is a dangerous, brutal place, and I have seen firsthand what it can do even to the strongest among us. I saw your good heart, but I projected my own limits, my own fears onto you. That was not fair. Your actions today, your bravery in the face of true danger, you proved you have the spirit of a true hero. More than anyone else I saw on that street today." Izuku's eyes welled up. This was the validation he had craved his entire life. "The truth is," All Might said, his gaze becoming distant, "I have been looking for someone. A successor." He then told Izuku the greatest secret of all. He spoke of a sacred torch, passed down through generations of heroes. A quirk unlike any other. My quirk is called One for All. He explained its dual nature, the ability to be transferred from one person to another, and its primary function, to stockpile raw, physical power. He described it as a crystallization of strength, growing more powerful with each new user who nurtured it and passed it on. He was the 8th holder. And he, the symbol of peace, was running out of time. He needed to find the 9th. I was going to offer it to you, All Might confessed, his voice filled with a strange conflict. After I saw you run toward that villain, I knew. Your spirit, your selflessness, you were worthy. I was going to find you and tell you that you could become a hero, because I was going to give you my quirk. Izuku's heart stopped. For a breathtaking, impossible second, he felt a surge of elation so powerful it almost made him dizzy. But then All Might's expression darkened, his brow furrowing in deep, troubled thought. But now, everything has changed. This fruit you ate. This power you now possess, young Midoriya, you must understand the nature of my quirk. One for All is pure, unadulterated, stockpiled physical power. It is an overwhelming force that requires a strong body to act as its vessel. A normal person's body would explode just from receiving it. They would be torn apart limb from limb. He gestured towards Izuku. But you are no longer a normal person. You already possess a power that seems, by your own description, to be one of pure physical strength. To pass One for All on to you now, it presents a new, terrifying problem. It could be redundant, a power layered on top of a similar power with no added benefit. But I fear it could be far, far worse. All Might began to pace, his gaunt frame casting a long, dancing shadow on the rooftop. Think of it like this. A normal body is an empty cup, too fragile to hold the ocean that is one for all. That is why a successor must train, to turn their body into a sturdy, worthy vessel. But your cup is no longer empty. By some bizarre twist of fate, you have already filled it with an unknown, potent substance. What happens when I try to pour an ocean into a cup that is already full? He stopped and looked at Izuku, his eyes grim. Does it simply overflow? Or does the pressure become too great? Do the two forces, both seeking to dominate your physical form, clash with one another? Could it create a reaction so violent that the cup doesn't just overflow, it shatters? Your body could be torn apart from the inside out, an internal cataclysm of power with no release. To give you One for All now might not be a gift. It might be a death sentence. The elation Izuku had felt moments ago evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. He had found an impossible power, only to be told it was the one thing standing between him and his lifelong dream. The irony was so cruel it was almost comical. Fate had given him a quirk, only to disqualify him from receiving the one that truly mattered. He looked down at his hands again. This strength, what was it? It had no name. It had no history. It came from a disgusting fruit he found in the trash. When he used it, he felt no sense of pride, only a terrifying lack of control. It was an alien force occupying his body. One for All was different. It was a legacy. It was the power of All Might, and the 7 heroes before him. It was a power with a purpose, to save, to protect, to be a symbol. Tears streamed down Izuku's face, but for the first time, they were not tears of despair. They were tears of pure, burning conviction. No, he said, his voice trembling but firm. All Might stopped pacing and looked at him. This power, Izuku said, clenching his fists so tightly his knuckles turned white. It's just a tool, All Might. A terrifying, uncontrolled force. When I used it, I wasn't thinking about being a hero, I was just acting. It's a blunt instrument. It has no will, no spirit. It's empty. He took a deep breath and looked up, meeting his idol's gaze directly. The timid, stuttering boy was gone, replaced by someone with a core of tempered steel. When you told me about One for All, a sacred torch, that's what I've always wanted. Not just to be strong. I don't want to be a hero so I can punch villains. I want to be a hero so that when people see me, they feel safe. I want to be a hero who saves people with a smile, who tells them that everything is going to be okay, just like you do. He took a step forward, his voice rising with passion. I don't just want your power, All Might. I want to inherit your will. I want the legacy. I want to be worthy of carrying that torch. This strength I have now. He looked down at his hands with a flicker of disgust. It doesn't make me a hero. It just makes me strong. Your quirk, it's the power of a real hero. If I can't inherit that, then this power I have is just a curse. A cruel joke. He stood there, chest heaving, his heart laid bare on that rooftop. He wanted to be a symbol. He wanted to earn the right to say, I am here. He wanted to be a hero like All Might, not just a brawler with a strange, fruit-given ability. All Might was silent. He looked at the boy, at the fire burning in his green eyes. It was the same fire he had seen when Izuku had rushed the sludge villain. A reckless, selfless, magnificent fire. But now, it was focused. It was articulate. It was the heart of a true successor. The dilemma still existed. The risk was still immeasurable. But Izuku's plea had changed the equation. It had reminded All Might that One for All was more than just stockpiled power. It was the crystallization of heroic will. And the boy before him possessed that will in spades. A new thought began to form in All Might's mind, a desperate rationalization, a gamble born of hope. Pouring an ocean into a full cup, he murmured, his gaze turning analytical. Perhaps I've been looking at it the wrong way. He looked at Izuku, a new light in his eyes. What if your cup isn't just full? What if this strange new power hasn't just filled the vessel? What if it has reinforced it? A normal body needs 10 months of intense training just to be able to handle the transfer. But your body, by some cosmic coincidence, it has already been infused with an incredible amount of raw energy. It has been fundamentally changed. It's possible, just possible, that you are not an unsuitable vessel. You might be the most suitable vessel there has ever been. It was a staggering leap of faith. A hypothesis built on a foundation of unknowns and impossibilities. But as he looked at Izuku Midoriya, at his unwavering resolve and his pure heart, All Might knew it was a risk he had to take. The world needed a new symbol of peace. And that symbol couldn't just be strong. It had to have a heart like the boy standing before him. Young Midoriya, All Might said, his voice resonating with a renewed sense of purpose. He placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder, the same gesture he had used on the first rooftop. But this time, it wasn't a gesture of pity. It was a gesture of anointing. You have the heart and spirit of a hero. Your body now has the power. The risks are immense. The consequences of what we are about to do are unknown to even me. He looked Izuku straight in the eye, his expression deadly serious. I will pass my quirk on to you. Izuku's breath caught in his throat. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. But you must understand. All Might's grip on his shoulder tightened. This will not be an easy path. The journey of every One for All user is fraught with danger, but yours will be unique. We are stepping into the dark, young Midoriya. Completely blind. The challenges you will face, the level of power you might one day wield, and the strain it will put on your body and soul, it is all uncharted territory. He offered a small, grim smile. Are you ready to walk that path with me? Izuku didn't hesitate. The answer was the only one he had ever had. Through his tears, through his trembling, he managed a nod, his entire being alight with a terrifying, brilliant hope. Yes, he breathed. Yes, I am. The sun had not yet breached the horizon, but Dagobah Beach was already bathed in a pre-dawn glow, the sky a soft gradient of violet and gray. The air, once thick with the stench of rust and decay, now carried only the clean, sharp scent of salt. The mountains of trash were gone. Where once stood grotesque monuments to human neglect, there was now only a vast, pristine expanse of sand, washed clean by the tireless efforts of one boy and the guidance of his idol. The 10-month training period had been unlike anything All Might had ever conceived. He had laid out his American dream plan, a rigorous schedule of physical conditioning, diet, and sleep, designed to turn a boy's body into a worthy vessel. He'd expected Izuku Midoriya to spend months, maybe the entire 10, just clearing a fraction of the beach. Izuku had cleared the first major section in 3 days. All Might remembered the first morning vividly. He had arrived to find Izuku standing beside a perfectly compressed cube of metal, 5 feet on all sides, that had once been 3 rusted-out cars and a dozen washing machines. The boy had simply folded them. He treated the steel like origami paper, his brow furrowed in concentration not from the effort, but from the fear of applying too much pressure. The training plan was immediately scrapped. Izuku didn't need to build muscle. He was already a walking hydraulic press. He didn't need strength conditioning. He needed a master class in restraint. Their sessions transformed. All Might would point to a towering heap of discarded furniture and electronics. Your task, young Midoriya, he'd say, is not to move it. It is to disassemble it. Unscrew every bolt. Remove every panel. Stack the components by material. If you bend a single piece of metal or crack a single pane of glass, you fail. It was agonizing. Izuku would spend hours, sweat beading on his forehead, his entire body trembling with the effort of not using his strength. His fingers, which could punch through concrete, had to learn the delicacy required to turn a tiny screw. He'd hold his breath, focusing all his mental energy on a simple task, only for the screwdriver to twist into a corkscrew in his hand or for the wooden frame of a sofa to crumble into dust when he tried to lift it. He became a master of his own body through sheer necessity. He learned to feel the hum of the alien power within him, the constant, thrumming presence of the power fruit, or the Riki no Mi, as All Might had once heard it called in a hushed underworld rumor, though he kept the apocryphal name to himself. Izuku learned to isolate it, to wall it off in his mind, allowing only a fraction of its might to seep into his limbs. The beach cleanup became a side effect of his real training, a 10-month meditation on the nature of control. By the 6th month, the beach was spotless. Izuku stood on the clean sand, his body lean and toned not from lifting junk, but from the constant, exhaustive tension of holding his own colossal strength in check. He looked at his hands. They had done this. They had reclaimed this shoreline. But the achievement felt hollow. He was a human trash compactor, a sentient construction vehicle. He was strong, but he didn't feel like a hero. He still felt like an empty vessel, waiting to be filled with purpose. Now, on the final day before the UA entrance exam, that moment had arrived. The rising sun cast long shadows across the sand. All Might stood before him, not in his skeletal form, but in the magnificent, beaming visage of the symbol of peace. The sight still stole Izuku's breath away. Young Midoriya! All Might's voice boomed, echoing slightly in the morning calm. Look at this beach! You have accomplished a feat that would have taken a whole team of professionals a year. You did not do this with brute force alone. You did this with control, with dedication, and with an unwavering spirit. Your vessel, it is ready. His expression turned solemn, the ever-present smile softening into something more profound. For decades, this power has been passed from master to student, a sacred torch to light the way in the darkest of times. It is the crystallization of courage, the embodiment of self-sacrifice. It is the hope of the people, made manifest. Now it is your turn. With a theatrical flair that was pure All Might, he plucked a single, golden strand of hair from one of his iconic antennae-like bangs. He held it out between his thumb and forefinger. The morning light caught it, making it gleam like a filament of pure sunlight. My DNA, All Might declared. Now eat this, Izuku stared. His mind, which had been preparing for a solemn, quasi-mystical ceremony, screeched to a halt. All the epic pronouncements, the talk of sacred torches and crystallized hope, had culminated in this. "Ha!" was all he could manage. "To inherit my power, you have to ingest some of my genetic material," All Might explained, completely straight-faced. "This is the quickest way." Izuku's face cycled through a dozen shades of confusion, disbelief, and sheer awkwardness. This was it. The culmination of his entire life's dream. The power of the number one hero, the legacy of One for All, was being offered to him in the form of a single hair. The sheer absurdity of it was almost too much to handle. But then he looked at All Might's face, at the utter seriousness in his eyes, and he knew this was real. With trembling fingers he took the hair. It felt like nothing in his hand. He looked at it, then back at All Might, who gave him an encouraging nod. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Izuku placed the hair on his tongue and swallowed. He waited. 1 second. 2. He felt nothing but the lingering memory of that foul, purple fruit. Maybe it didn't work. Maybe his body rejected it, and then it happened. It began not as a warmth, but as a jolt. A single, sharp spike of energy, like a lightning strike directly to his soul. It was foreign, alien, utterly other. Instantly, the power of the fruit, the deep, constant hum that had become a part of him, reacted. It roared to life, not as a source of strength, but as a defense mechanism. It was a brutal, primal, territorial response, like a guard dog attacking an intruder. It surged from every cell, attempting to locate and annihilate the foreign energy that had just invaded its domain. Izuku screamed. It was a raw, agonized sound torn from his throat. The world dissolved into a storm of pain and light. It was a civil war being waged in his blood and bone. Two suns were trying to occupy the same, finite space within his soul. One for all, a torrent of stockpiled energy, pushed inward, seeking to merge with his being. The fruit's power, a wellspring of raw, physical might, pushed outward, trying to expel it. He collapsed to his knees, his hands clawing at his chest as if he could rip the conflict out of his body. His vision blurred, filled with blinding flashes of emerald green and deep violet. A deafening roar filled his ears, a sound like 1,000 waterfalls and a crackling bonfire all at once. Young Midoriya! All Might's voice was a distant echo, filled with alarm. Green lightning, the signature crackle of One for All, began to arc across Izuku's skin, but it was met and violently repulsed by shimmering, purple waves of energy, the visual manifestation of the fruit's power. The two forces clashed around him, scorching the sand, sending sparks of pure energy fizzing into the air. The ground beneath his knees began to crack, spiderwebbing outward from the sheer concentration of force. The pain was absolute. It felt as if every atom in his body was being pulled in two different directions at once. His muscles spasmed, contracting and releasing with enough force to snap bone, though his strangely durable body held. He could feel One for All, not just as a power, but as a presence, a chorus of voices, of wills, from generations past, trying to find purchase. And he could feel his own power, a singular, monolithic entity, rejecting them. The vessel wasn't just full, it was fighting back. All Might watched in horror. This was his worst fear realized. The clash was visible, tangible. The boy was a living nexus of a catastrophic power struggle. He was about to rush forward, to do something, anything, when the nature of the conflict shifted. Izuku, on the verge of blacking out, his mind shattering under the strain, did the only thing he could. He let go. He stopped fighting. He stopped trying to control it, to understand it. He surrendered. In the deepest corner of his consciousness, he accepted the new power, not as an invader, but as a partner. He willed his original power to stand down, and in that moment of surrender, the war ended. The two forces didn't annihilate each other. They didn't neutralize. They merged. The violent, chaotic storm of green and purple ceased its warring and began to spiral, weaving together into a single, incandescent helix of energy. The roar in his head subsided, replaced by a hum of such profound depth and power it vibrated through the very air around him. The two suns did not extinguish one another. They fused into a single, larger, terrifyingly brilliant star. A final, blinding flash of light erupted from Izuku's body, and he was thrown backward, his head hitting the soft sand with a dull thud. His body convulsed once, and then he was still. The energy vanished. The world was quiet again, save for the gentle lapping of the waves. He was unconscious. All Might rushed to his side, his heart pounding in his own emaciated chest. He checked the boy's pulse. It was there, but it was like a jackhammer, a frantic, powerful rhythm that spoke of the immense energy now contained within him. His body, though outwardly unharmed, was radiating a palpable heat. All Might stayed by his side for hours, watching the sun climb high into the sky, his mind reeling from what he had witnessed. He had not poured an ocean into a cup. He had poured it into a live volcano. When Izuku's eyes finally fluttered open, the first thing he saw was All Might's skeletal face, etched with worry, looming over him. Young Midoriya? Izuku groaned, sitting up. His head was pounding, but beneath the ache, he felt different. The constant, low-level hum of the fruit's power was still there, but it had changed. It was no longer a solitary note. It was now a chord, deeper, richer, and infinitely more resonant. He could feel one for all woven into the very fabric of his being. A new layer of existence he hadn't known was missing. I think it worked, Izuku croaked, his voice raw. It did more than work, my boy, All Might said, his tone a mixture of awe and terror. Now, let's see what it is. They started slowly. Just try to access it, All Might instructed. Don't release it. Just feel it. The power of one for all. Izuku closed his eyes and focused. He could feel it, a vast, boundless ocean of energy within him. But it was no longer separate from his original strength. They were one and the same, a single, unified reservoir of unimaginable power. His Riki strength was the water, and one for all was the tide, the force that could move the water with purpose. Okay, All Might said, his voice tense. The classic test. A finger flick. But listen to me very carefully. I don't want you to use 5%. I don't even want you to use 1%. I want you to focus on the smallest possible output you can imagine. The feeling of plucking a single grain of rice from a bowl. The absolute minimum. Izuku nodded, his expression grim. He remembered what even a tiny miscalculation could do. He stood, facing the ocean, and extended his right arm. He took a deep breath, channeling the meditative calm he had spent months cultivating. He reached into the roaring furnace inside him and tried to cup a single, tiny ember. He focused the infinitesimal spark into the tip of his right index finger. He whispered the word that would define his future. Smash! He flicked his finger. The result was not a gust of wind. It was a cataclysm. The air in front of his finger compressed and then detonated. A sonic boom, sharp and violent, shattered the morning calm. It wasn't just a shockwave of air. It was a focused beam of pure, kinetic force. The beam struck the surface of the ocean 50 yards out. The water didn't just splash, it vaporized. A huge section of the sea flash boiled into a cloud of steam, and the force continued downward, unimpeded. It struck the seabed and carved a deep, perfect trench in the sand and rock, 100 yards long and 20 feet deep, before its energy finally dissipated. For a moment, a canyon existed on the ocean floor. Then the walls of water on either side collapsed back in with a thunderous roar, sending a massive plume of spray high into the air. Izuku and All Might stared, mouths agape, at the violent rearrangement of the seascape. Then the recoil hit. It wasn't just his finger that broke. The concentrated force, 100 times greater than he'd intended, had nowhere else to go. It shot backward up his arm like a cannonball. His index finger shattered into bone dust. The metacarpals in his hand cracked and splintered. The explosive torque snapped both his radius and ulna, the bones bursting through the skin in a gruesome compound fracture. The force continued, dislocating his wrist, elbow, and shoulder in a single, brutal instant. Izuku screamed, a sound of pure agony, and collapsed, clutching the ruined, mangled limb to his chest. His right arm was a grotesque parody of an arm, bent at unnatural angles, swollen and rapidly turning a deep, sickly purple. All Might, shaking himself out of his stunned horror, rushed to his side. His face was pale. The output, he stammered, looking from the boy's ruined arm to the still churning ocean. That wasn't 5%. That looked like 30%, maybe 40% of my full power. But your body, your arm is destroyed, but the rest of you is intact. The vessel held, but the conduit, it overloaded completely. He finally understood the new equation. It wasn't additive. It was multiplicative. Izuku's base strength from the fruit was acting as a massive amplifier for one for all. When he tried to channel a 5% spark of OFA, his body instinctively magnified it with its own innate power, turning a spark into an inferno. His training had to change. Again. The central conflict was no longer about building a strong vessel, or even about basic control. It was about learning to perform brain surgery with a jackhammer. The next few months leading up to the exam were a grueling lesson in humility. All Might's training became esoteric, more akin to a monk's than a bodybuilder's. They spent days in meditation, with Izuku trying to simply feel the two intertwined powers, to distinguish the whisper of OFA from the roar of the fruit. You cannot command the ocean, young Midoriya, All Might would say, as Izuku sat cross-legged on the sand. You must learn to be the calm surface, to feel the currents beneath, and to borrow only a single drop for your purpose. Your instincts are to unleash a tidal wave. You must unlearn a lifetime of powerlessness and a year of overwhelming strength. You must find the middle path. Izuku would spend hours trying to perform impossibly delicate tasks. Stacking pebbles without turning them to dust. Tracing kanji in the wet sand without causing a tremor. Each failure was a frustrating, painful reminder of the sheer, unbridled chaos he now contained. He was a bomb, and his life's work was to become his own disarmament squad. The day before the exam, they stood at the water's edge, watching the sunset paint the sky. Izuku had been practicing channeling a minuscule amount of energy into a seashell, trying to make it hum without shattering. He had failed for the 100th time, the shell exploding into a fine powder in his palm. Frustrated, he kicked at a loose, seaweed-covered rock at the shoreline. His foot, imbued with a flicker of his annoyance, sent the rock skipping across the water's surface. He took an involuntary step to watch it, his foot landing not on sand, but in a shallow tide pool. The water barely covered his ankle. But the effect was instantaneous and absolute. The roaring furnace of power inside him did not dim. It was snuffed out. The profound, chord-like hum in his soul vanished, replaced by a deafening, terrifying silence. The strength drained from his limbs, not gradually, but as if a plug had been pulled. His body, which had felt like a fortress of steel and potential, suddenly became a leaden, useless weight. The normal aches and strains of a human body, long since rendered irrelevant by his power, came rushing back all at once. His legs buckled, unable to even support his own weight. He collapsed, falling face first into the shallow water with a pathetic splash. He couldn't move. He couldn't even lift his head. The water filled his nose and mouth, and a primal panic seized him. He was drowning in 3 inches of water. "Young Midoriya?" He heard All Might's shout, but it sounded distant, muffled. He felt a pair of strong, thin arms roll him over. He gasped, coughing up a lungful of salt water, shivering uncontrollably. Tashinori Yagi stared down at him, his eyes wide with a new kind of horror. He had seen the boy's strength vanish. He pulled Izuku fully out of the water and onto the dry sand. The moment his body was clear of the seawater, the power returned. It slammed back into him with the force of a physical blow, a roaring inferno relighting in an instant. Izuku gasped as the strength flooded his limbs again. He sat up, trembling, looking from the water to his hands. What was that?" he whispered, his voice shaking. All Might was silent for a long time, his face a grim mask. He thought of the underworld rumors, the fragmented legends of impossible powers and the curses that came with them. "The sea hates them," one old report had said. "It robs them of their strength." He had dismissed it as folklore. Until now. "The fruit," All Might said, his voice grave. "It gave you a great gift, my boy. It seems it also gave you a terrible curse." He looked at the vast, dark ocean stretching to the horizon. "The sea. It appears to be your enemy. It negates your power completely." Izuku stared at the waves lapping gently at the shore. That serene, beautiful expanse was now a symbol of his ultimate vulnerability. He possessed a power that could potentially rival All Might himself, a power that could reshape the very earth. But a simple splash in a puddle, a sudden downpour, a fall into a river, could turn the strongest boy in the world into a helpless, drowning child. The overflowing chalice of his power had a crack in it, a fatal flaw. And as he prepared to step onto the stage of UA High, he knew his greatest weakness wasn't controlling his strength, but the simple, undeniable weight of water. The gates of UA High School were less an entryway and more a monumental statement. They towered over the crowd of nervous examinees, twin pillars of gleaming steel and reinforced glass, a physical manifestation of the impossible dream that lay beyond. For most of his life, Izuku Midoriya had imagined this moment as a fantasy, a daydream to be savored and then regretfully put away. To be standing here, in the flesh, was surreal. To be standing here as a walking, talking powder keg of cosmic power was utterly terrifying. He was not the same boy who had cowered his way through middle school. The 10 months of training had chiseled away his soft edges, replacing them with a quiet, solid presence. His shoulders were broader, his posture straight, a necessity learned from the constant physical tension of containing his own strength. He no longer looked like a boy who would be blown over by a strong gust of wind. He looked grounded, rooted to the earth. Internally, however, he was a maelstrom of anxiety. The usual pre-exam jitters were there, but they were a gentle breeze compared to the hurricane of his true fear, control. Every student around him was a bundle of nervous energy, their corks practically leaking from their pores. A girl with pink skin absently created a small glob of acid in her palm before dissolving it. A boy with bird-like features ruffled his feathers. They were worried about points, about performance, about living up to their potential. Izuku was worried about accidentally leveling the entire testing facility. He clutched the straps of his backpack, his knuckles white. The fabric felt fragile, as if a thoughtless clench could shred it to atoms. He took a deep, centering breath, mimicking the meditative exercises All Might had drilled into him. Be the calm surface. Feel the current beneath. Borrow only a single drop. The mantra was a lifeline in a sea of overwhelming power. Out of my way, Deku! The voice was a familiar explosion of gravel and arrogance. Katsuki Bakugo shoved past him, not even bothering to look at him. But Izuku felt the momentary, sharp glance that swept over him, a flicker of confusion and disgust in Bakugo's red eyes. He had noticed the change. The scrawny, trembling loser he'd known his whole life now stood with a strange new solidity. It was a discrepancy Bakugo's mind couldn't yet reconcile, and it clearly infuriated him. Izuku watched him go, a pang of the old fear mixing with a new, complex cocktail of emotions. He was no longer afraid of Bakugo's fists. He was afraid of what his own fists could do in response. He took a step forward, ready to follow the flow of students into the orientation hall, and was promptly tripped by his own feet. It was a classic Izuku move, a moment of physical gracelessness that felt jarringly out of place with his new body. He flailed, a yelp escaping his lips as the world tilted. He was going to eat pavement. But before he could, a gentle hand tapped his shoulder. Whoa there! Are you okay? A girl with rosy cheeks and a permanent, bubbly smile was looking at him with concern. The touch was light, but the moment her 5 fingers made contact, a strange, floaty sensation spread through him. His forward momentum stopped, and he felt his feet lift an inch off the ground. He was weightless. Oh, sorry, she said, quickly pulling her hand back. I used my quirk on you to stop you from falling. It just seemed better than letting you face plant. My bad, I should have asked. He settled back onto the ground with a soft thud. He stared at her, momentarily stunned. Ochako Uraraka. Quirk, zero gravity. He recognized it from his frantic pre-exam research. Thank you, he stammered, his cheeks flushing. The old, nervous Izuku was still very much present. That was amazing. I would have, yeah, she laughed, a bright, musical sound. No problem. It'd be bad luck to start the exam with a scraped chin, right? I'm super nervous. Are you? Before he could answer, she was swept away by the crowd. Izuku stood there for a moment, a goofy smile on his face. Someone had been nice to him. Someone had saved him. It was a novel experience. He shook his head, refocused, and hurried into the auditorium. The written exam was a blur of logic problems and hero ethics questions. It was the practical exam that consumed his thoughts. Present mix hyper-energetic explanation of the rules barely registered. 1-point robots, 2-point robots, 3-point robots. It sounded simple enough. Smash robots, get points. For everyone else, that is. For him, smash was a variable that ranged from dent a fender to create a localized earthquake. When they were bussed to their designated battle center, a sprawling, full-scale replica of a city district, the scale of his problem became terrifyingly clear. The buildings were real. The streets were real. And most importantly, the other examinees were very, very real. A single miscalculated punch could bring a building down on top of them. Collateral damage wasn't just a scoring penalty. It was a potentially fatal consequence. As he stood before the massive gates of Battle Center B, waiting for the start signal, he saw Uraraka again. She was doing little breathing exercises, her face pale with anxiety. He wanted to go over and wish her luck, but his own throat was too tight. Start! Present Mix's voice blared from hidden speakers, and the gates slid open. The other students burst forward in a chaotic surge. Izuku hesitated for a split second, and in that time, the pack was already a block ahead of him. "What are you waiting for?" Present Mix's voice seemed to chide from above. "There are no countdowns in a real fight, right?" He bolted. His controlled run was still faster than most people's sprint. He shot past several students, who stared at the green blur. He rounded the first corner, and came face to face with his first target, a one-pointer. It was a sleek, green machine on a single wheel, its red optic glowing menacingly. It swiveled to face him, and charged. Okay. A drop from the ocean. Just a drop. Instead of punching it, Izuku ducked under its lunge. As it passed over him, he reached up, his fingers finding purchase on its metal chassis. He didn't punch. He didn't rip. He just squeezed. There was a sickening groaning sound, like a giant bending a steel girder. The robot's entire frame buckled inward, its will locking up as its internal mechanisms were crushed into a mechanical singularity. It sparked, whirred pathetically, and then fell silent, its optic flickering out. 1 point. It had worked. No explosion. No shockwave. Just a quiet, efficient disablement. A surge of relief washed over him. He could do this. He moved deeper into the city. The sounds of explosions, crackling ice, and laser blasts echoed through the concrete canyons. He saw other examinees in action. A boy with blonde hair shot a sparkling laser from his navel, neatly piercing a two-pointer. A girl with dark hair created a cannon from her arm, blasting another to smithereens. They were all so flashy, so direct. His style was different. It was brutal, efficient, and bizarrely quiet. He encountered a group of 3 two-pointers. Instead of engaging them head-on, he ran to the side of the street, jammed his fingers into a crack in the asphalt, and pulled. A massive slab of road, 10 feet long and 5 feet wide, ripped free from the ground. With a grunt of controlled effort he heaved it into the air and dropped it on the robots, crushing them flat under several tons of pavement and rebar. 6 more points. In the observation room, a panel of UA's top pro heroes watched the monitors, their expressions a mix of boredom, intrigue, and clinical assessment. "That kid with the engines is racking up points," said a teacher, pointing to a screen showing Ida Tenya. "The explosion kid from Battle Center A is a real powerhouse, if a bit reckless," noted another. Then, Principal Nizu, a small, white creature who could be a mouse, a dog, or a bear, gestured with a paw toward one of the screens. "And what do we make of him?" On the screen, Izuku Midoriya was confronting a 3-pointer, a hulking, tank-like machine. Instead of attacking, he was dismantling it. He had ripped one of its cannon arms clean off at the shoulder joint, and was now systematically tearing open its chest plates, pulling out handfuls of wiring and circuitry like he was weeding a garden. The robot sparked, convulsed, and collapsed. "Midoriya Izuku," said a teacher, tapping at a tablet. "Quirk, super strength. According to his file, that's not just super strength." Eraserhead grumbled from his corner, his eyes narrowed in grim fascination. "He's using overwhelming power with a bizarre level of restraint. It's clumsy, but deliberate. He's actively avoiding using concussive force. Look at the collateral damage reports for his sector, 0. It's the lowest of any high-scoring applicant. He fights like a man trying to disarm a bomb with a sledgehammer." Nizu chirped, his black eyes gleaming with intellectual curiosity. Most peculiar. Back in the city, Izuku was starting to find a rhythm. Rip, bend, crush, disable. He tore a fire hydrant from its mooring and used the high-pressure stream to short-circuit a group of one-pointers. A risky move, given his weakness, but the spray was minimal. He was just starting to feel a sliver of confidence, his point total climbing into the respectable 40s, when the ground began to shake. A deep, groaning rumble echoed through the city, growing louder and louder. Dust rained down from the tops of the buildings. The other examinees stopped fighting, looking around in confusion and fear. Then it appeared, peeking over the top of a 50-story skyscraper, then rising higher and higher, was the 0-pointer. It was a monster. A Goliath of green metal and dark steel, easily twice the size of the tallest building in the battle center. Its single, massive red eye glowed with malevolent intent. It was less a robot and more a walking natural disaster. Just a gimmick! An obstacle to be avoided! Present mixed words echoed in Izuku's mind. The other students didn't need to be told twice. They turned and fled, a panic stampede of would-be heroes. Run! It's not worth any points! Izuku turned to run with them. He wasn't an idiot. There was no reason to engage that thing. It was a test of risk assessment, and the correct answer was to get away. But as he turned, he heard a cry. Oof! He glanced back. About 50 yards away, near the base of the colossal robot, was a familiar figure. Ochako Uraraka. She was trapped, her leg pinned under a large chunk of concrete that had been dislodged by the robot's emergence. She was struggling, her face pale with pain and terror, as the zero-pointer's massive shadow fell over her. The world went silent, the fleeing students. The distant sounds of combat. The voice of Present Mike. It all faded away. The only thing that existed was the girl, the rubble, and the descending foot of the giant robot, a foot the size of a city bus. There was no time for a plan. No time for a delicate, controlled application of force. No time to worry about collateral damage. There was only time to act. He saw her terrified face. He saw All Might's face in his mind's eye smiling. You have the spirit of a true hero. A hero saves people. It was that simple. The calm surface of his mind shattered. He didn't just borrow a drop from the ocean. He opened the floodgates. He pushed off the ground, and the asphalt beneath his feet cracked. He wasn't running. He was launching himself forward, a green and black projectile. He could feel One for All surging, not as a gentle current but as a raging tsunami. And he could feel the power of the Riki no Mi meeting it, welcoming it, multiplying it into a force of unimaginable magnitude. Green lightning, brighter and more ferocious than he had ever manifested, erupted around his entire body. The energy wasn't just in one limb, it was everywhere, a crackling, roaring corona of pure power. He felt the wills of the past OFA users screaming in his mind, a chorus of approval and terror. He felt his own power, the monolithic strength from the fruit, swell to an apocalyptic scale. He was less than 100 feet from the robot now. It loomed over him, an unassailable mountain of steel. He bent his knees, coiling every ounce of this cataclysmic, merged power into his legs. He leaped. The ground beneath him didn't just crack, it cratered. He shot into the sky, a meteor in reverse, ascending with breathtaking speed. 10 stories. 20. 30. He was still accelerating. The wind screamed past his ears. The world below shrank. He drew back his right arm, the one he had so grievously injured before. He knew what was about to happen. He knew the price. And he accepted it. He could see the robot's massive, stupid face, its single red eye tracking his ascent. He was level with its head now, hanging in the air for a fraction of a second at the apex of his jump. He poured everything into his fist. One for all at 100%. The Riki no Mi at 100%. The combined, multiplicative force that had torn a trench in the ocean floor. All of it, focused into a single, heroic, sacrificial point. He screamed, the sound a raw, primal roar of defiance that was drowned out by the thunder of his own power. Smewa Wayawas! His fist connected with the zero-pointer's faceplate. For a silent, infinitesimal moment, nothing happened. Then, reality broke. The point of impact did not just dent the metal, inches of reinforced steel, warped inward, then shattered, then vaporized. The punch didn't just destroy the head, it created a sonic boom that was not a sound, but a physical event. A visible dome of compressed air exploded outward from his fist, traveling at the speed of sound. Every window in every building in a 10-block radius shattered simultaneously, a cascading symphony of destruction. The shockwave hit the ground and kicked up a titanic cloud of dust and debris that engulfed the entire lower section of the city. The robot's head didn't just explode. It ceased to exist. The force of the blow transferred through its entire body, a kinetic wave of pure annihilation. Its torso buckled. Its limbs were torn from their joints. The massive machine, a structure weighing thousands of tons, was blown backward as if hit by an invisible god. It flew through the air, tumbling end over end, before crashing into a distant building, which promptly collapsed into a heap of rubble. The silence that followed was more deafening than the explosion. In the observation room, the heroes were thrown back from the monitors by the feedback shock. Alarms blared. Screens flickered and died. What in the... Report! What was that energy spike? All sensors in Battle Center B are offline. Eraserhead was on his feet, his scarf floating around him, his eyes wide behind his goggles. He stared at the single, static-filled screen that still showed a partial image. Nizu was gripping the arms of his chair, his fur standing on end, his usual pleasant demeanor replaced by one of cold, hard shock. All Might, in a separate, private observation room, was standing, his hand clamped over his mouth, his eyes wide with a mixture of profound pride and absolute terror. My God, my boy, what have you done? High above the ruined cityscape, Izuku Midoriya was falling. The recoil was beyond catastrophic. It was not a clean break. It was in detonation. The force that had annihilated the zero-pointer had nowhere else to go but back into his own body. His right arm, from the knuckles to the shoulder, was gone. Not gone in the sense of being blown off, but in the sense of being utterly, comprehensively ruined. The bones had turned to powder. The muscles had been flash-cooked and torn to shreds. The skin was blackened and split open. It was a useless, mangled appendage, flopping in the wind, but it didn't stop there. The recoil hadn't been contained to one limb. The overwhelming force had traveled through his entire body. He felt a sickening snap from his left leg, then another from his right as the bones fractured under the strain of the initial leap. The kinetic backlash shot through his torso, rupturing blood vessels, tearing muscle fibers, and bruising his internal organs. It was like being in a car crash at 1,000 miles an hour. He fell from the sky, a broken, smoking puppet with its strings cut, his vision blurring, the world spinning. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the ground rushing up to meet him, and then a slap. He felt a light impact on his cheek, and the terrifying sensation of falling abruptly stopped. He was floating, suspended 20 feet above the ground, his broken limbs dangling uselessly. Below him, Ochako Uraraka was on her hands and knees, one hand pressed to the ground for balance, the other outstretched towards him. She was breathing heavily, her face pale and green. "Release!" she gasped, and vomited a stream of rainbow-colored glitter onto the pavement. His weightlessness vanished, and he fell the remaining 20 feet, landing with a sickening thud in a heap of shattered limbs. The pain, which had been a distant, roaring inferno, came crashing back, and he screamed before mercifully passing out. The gates to the battle center burst open, and pro-heroes swarmed in, followed by medical bots. Recovery Girl herself was at the forefront, her face a mask of grim urgency. They found him at the center of a crater, surrounded by a field of shattered glass, his body a twisted, broken mess. The air still smelled of ozone and burned metal. Recovery Girl knelt beside him, her lips pressed into a thin, hard line as she assessed the damage. She had seen horrific injuries in her long career. She had seen heroes push their quirks too far. She had mended countless broken bones and torn ligaments. But this was different. She looked at the utter ruin of his right arm, the compound fractures in his legs, the deep purple bruising that was already covering his torso. This wasn't the result of a quirk going out of control. This was the aftermath of a self-inflicted, full-body demolition. The sheer scale of the energy required to inflict this level of damage upon oneself was something she had never encountered. She looked up at the dust settling around the ruined cityscape, at the smoldering remains of the zero-pointer hundreds of yards away. Her gaze returned to the broken boy at her feet. "What kind of monster?" she whispered to herself, her voice filled with a horrified awe. "Did this to himself?" The first day of school at UA High was supposed to be a dream come true. For Izuku Midoriya, it was a haze of pain medication and the phantom ache of bones that had been shattered, mended, and shattered again. Recovery Girl's quirk was a miracle, accelerating the body's natural healing process, but it wasn't magic. It used the patient's own stamina as fuel, and Izuku had been running on empty. He'd spent the week following the entrance exam in a state of near-constant, debilitating exhaustion, sleeping for 20 hours a day and waking only to be subjected to another of Recovery Girl's draining kisses. The physical toll was immense, but the mental one was worse. He couldn't shake the memory of the fall, of the horrifying, absolute finality of his own power turning on him. He had saved the girl, yes. He had passed the exam, earning a staggering 60 rescue points on top of his 45 villain points, landing him in first place. But he had done so by turning himself into a human firework. He wasn't a hero. He was a one-shot weapon with a suicidal trigger. Walking into Class 1A, his body still sore and stiff, was like stepping into another dimension. These were the best of the best, the elite chosen from thousands of applicants. And he was one of them. The sheer improbability of it all was dizzying. He saw the intimidating boy with engines on his legs, Ida Tenya. He saw the bubbly, kind-faced girl who had saved him, Ochako Uraraka. And sitting in the front row, his feet kicked up on the desk in a blatant show of disrespect, was Katsuki Bakugo. Izuku froze in the doorway, his heart sinking. He had hoped, prayed, that they would be in different classes. Bakugo's head snapped up, and his crimson eyes locked onto Izuku. The usual contempt was there, but it was now laced with a new, volatile element, utter, seething confusion. He didn't say a word. He just stared, his gaze a palpable force, a promise of a future confrontation that made the hair on Izuku's arms stand up. Shaking, Izuku found his assigned seat. The classroom buzzed with the excited chatter of new beginnings, but he couldn't participate. He felt like an imposter, a fraud who had stumbled into a party he hadn't been invited to. Then, a voice from the floor cut through the noise. "If you're just here to make friends, then you can pack up your things and leave." A man who looked like he'd been sleeping in a gutter for a week lay on the floor inside a yellow sleeping bag, slurping from a juice pouch. Shota Aizawa. The erasure hero, Eraserhead. The man's emergence from his cocoon and his subsequent rational introduction set a grim tone for the day. No opening ceremony, no guidance counselor meetings, just a quick change into gym uniforms and a trip out to the P grounds for a quirk apprehension test. The threat of expulsion for last place hung heavy in the air, a cold dose of reality that sobered even the most arrogant students. But as Aizawa explained the tests, the 50-meter dash, the grip strength test, the standing long jump, Izuku's anxiety morphed into a very specific and potent dread. These were all tests of raw physical output, tests he could theoretically ace with enough power to level the entire school. Tests that were a minefield of potential disaster. Aizawa's gaze swept over the students, lingering for a fraction of a second longer on Izuku. His eyes, dark and perpetually tired, held no warmth. They were the eyes of a predator sizing up its prey. But when he looked at Izuku, it wasn't the dismissive glance one gives to the weak. It was a look of intense, critical evaluation, the way a bomb squad technician looks at a particularly unstable device. Aizawa had been in the observation room. He had seen the footage. He didn't see a kid with a powerful, self-destructive quirk. He saw a walking natural disaster with all the fine control of a nuclear explosion. The first few tests were an exercise in supreme restraint. For the 50-meter dash, Izuku focused, channeling the tiniest spark he could manage into his legs for a single, explosive push-off. He still overdid it, cracking the starting block and finishing in just over 3 seconds. But his legs remained intact. For the standing long jump, he cleared the entire sandpit, landing clumsily on the grass beyond. He earned top scores, but each success was accompanied by a wave of nausea as he felt the immense, caged power within him strain against its leash. The grip strength test was pure torture. He held the device, his hand trembling, his mind a whirlwind of calculations. Too little pressure, and he'd have a normal score. Too much, and he'd crush the device into a metallic diamond. He squeezed, focusing on that plucking a grain of rice feeling. The device's digital display rocketed up past 500 kilograms before the internal mechanisms groaned, sparked, and died with a puff of smoke. Aizawa marked down the last registered number without comment. Through it all, he could feel Bakugo's eyes burning into his back. The rage was radiating off him in palpable waves. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was a deep, fundamental offense. The world as Bakugo knew it had been upended. The hierarchy he had built his entire identity on, with himself at the pinnacle and Deku at the absolute bottom, had been annihilated. He had seen the exam scores. He had heard the rumors of the kid who took out the 0-pointer. He knew it was Deku, and the knowledge was a poison in his veins. The final test was the ball throw. Aizawa handed Izuku a softball. Midoriya. You place first in the entrance exam. It wasn't a compliment. It was a statement of fact, loaded with unspoken questions. Let's see what you can do when you're not trying to save someone. Izuku stepped into the circle, the ball feeling weightless and fragile in his hand. He could still feel the phantom sensation of his arm shattering, the memory of the recoil a ghost haunting his nerves. He knew what Aizawa wanted. He wanted to see the power that had obliterated the zero-pointer. Don't be an idiot, he told himself. A small smash. Just enough for a good score. Don't break yourself on the first day. He drew his arm back, preparing to channel a controlled burst, the same kind he'd used in the dash. He started to pour a tiny sliver of one for all into his arm, and then it vanished. The crackle of green lightning died. The feeling of immense power receded, leaving only the bass, humming strength of the Riki no Mi. He stumbled, caught off balance by the sudden absence of the power he was trying to wield. He looked up. Aizawa's eyes were glowing a faint, baleful red. His black hair and scarf were floating around his head as if he were underwater. He had erased his quirk. Or, at least, what he thought was his quirk. I erased your quirk, Aizawa said, his voice a low growl. The other students gasped. From what I saw in the exam, you can't control your power. Are you planning to incapacitate yourself again and wait for someone to come save you? Izuku's blood ran cold. He had forgotten. Eraserhead could nullify quirks. But it hadn't worked completely. He could still feel the deep, resonant thrum of the fruit's power. It was weaker, somehow dampened, but it was still there. Aizawa had cut him off from One for All, the transferable, energy-based aspect of his power, but the fundamental, biological change wrought by the devil fruit remained. It wasn't a quirk in the traditional sense. It was a part of his physical makeup, and Aizawa's power could only partially suppress it. You have potential, Midoriya, Aizawa continued, his hair settling back down as he blinked, the red glow fading. The feeling of One for All rushed back into Izuku, a dizzying influx. But if your only plan is to fire yourself like a cannon, you have no future as a hero. You'd be a liability, a one-time use martyr. That's not what we train here. I've returned your quirk. You have one more throw. Show me you can be more than a suicidal idiot. The words were harsh, but they weren't cruel. They were a challenge. A lifeline. Aizawa wasn't trying to break him. He was trying to see if he was worth building. Izuku stood in the circle, his mind racing. He couldn't use a full power smash. He couldn't afford to break his arm again. But he also couldn't just get a normal score. Aizawa's warning had been clear. He had to show control. He had to show potential. He remembered the endless hours on the beach with all might. The meditation. The focus. The whisper of the current, not the roar of the ocean. He remembered the finger flick that had carved a trench in the sea, the devastating consequence of channeling overwhelming power through a tiny conduit. What if that was the key? Not to lessen the power, but to focus the release? He took a new stance. He held the ball, but his focus wasn't on his arm. It was on the tip of his right index finger. He closed his eyes, shutting out the stares of his classmates, the simmering rage of Bakugo, the critical gaze of Aizawa. He reached into the roaring, fused core of his power. The sun forged from the merging of OFA and the Riki no Mi. He didn't try to take a small piece. He let the full, terrifying power surge into his arm. The green lightning erupted again, this time brighter, wilder, crackling up his arm and across his shoulders. His classmates took an involuntary step back. Bakugo's eyes widened. That's it, he thought, a thrill of horrified excitement shooting through him. That's the power I saw. But just as the energy was about to consume his entire arm, Izuku did something different. With an immense act of mental will, he constricted it. He forced the cataclysmic power, a force that could level a building, down a narrowing channel, all the way to the single, final point of contact with the ball, the tip of his index finger. His entire arm glowed like a celestial filament. The pressure was immense. The pain was excruciating, like containing a supernova in a glass jar. SMASH! He screamed, whipping his arm forward. The release was not an explosion. It was a surgical strike. The ball shot from his hand, not with a simple whoosh, but with a deafening crack that sounded like a rifle shot next to the ear. It left a visible distortion in the air, a miniature sonic boom that followed it as it ascended. It didn't fly in an arc. It flew in a straight, unwavering line, a white speck that vanished into the stratosphere. For a moment, everyone stared at the empty sky. Then they looked back at Izuku. He was standing, his arm outstretched, his whole body trembling from the strain. But he wasn't screaming in agony. He wasn't clutching a mangled limb. His arm was fine. He looked down at his hand. His index finger was a deep, angry purple and swollen to twice its normal size. The nail was shattered. The pain was sharp and intense, a clean, focused agony instead of a messy, all-consuming one. But it was just a finger. A broken finger. Compared to the alternative, it was the greatest victory of his life. A small beep came from Aizawa's phone. He held it up for the class to see. The screen displayed a number so large it looked like an error, followed by an infinity symbol. A stunned silence fell over the class. He threw it over 700 meters. Someone whispered in awe. Seriously? Uraraka clapped her hands together. Awesome! Aizawa looked at Izuku, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. It was a terrifying sight. Good, he said, his voice a low rasp. You're not entirely hopeless. He had seen it. The problem-solving, the creative application of power. The willingness to accept calculated injury for maximum effect without self-destruction. He saw a mind at work, not just a fist. But one person wasn't impressed. He was incandescent with rage. DKU! Bakugo exploded forward, his hands crackling with nitroglycerin. You bastard! What the hell was that? Explain yourself! Before he could reach Izuku, he was ensnared by Aizawa's capture weapon, the durable fabric wrapping around him, immobilizing him instantly. Stand down, Aizawa said, his eyes flaring red again. Stop making me use my quirk. I've got dry eye. Bakugo thrashed against the bindings, his face contorted in a mask of pure fury. It wasn't just about the power anymore. It was about the lie. You've had that quirk this whole time, haven't you? He roared, his voice raw with a sense of betrayal that ran bone deep. You've been looking down on me. Playing me for a fool. You and all the other damn extras, pretending to be a useless pebble while you were hiding this. The accusation was so far from the truth that Izuku didn't even know how to respond. He could only stare, his heart aching. This wasn't the anger of a rival who had been surpassed. This was the fury of a boy whose entire worldview had been proven a lie. For his entire life, Bakugo had defined himself by his strength in relation to Izuku's weakness. Now that foundation was gone, and he was in free fall, lashing out at the one responsible. Aizawa subdued him, and the rest of the tests concluded in a tense silence. The results were posted. Izuku was at the top. The student in last place, Minoru Mineta, was sobbing, certain he was being expelled. Aizawa revealed it was all a rational deception to draw out their best performances, and the day ended. But for Izuku, it was just beginning. He was on his way out of the school, his finger throbbing in a makeshift splint from Recovery Girl, when a hand clamped down on his shoulder. He flinched, spinning around to see Bakugo. His face was unnaturally calm, his usual sneer gone, replaced by a cold, hard intensity. We're not done, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Meet me at the indoor battlegrounds after school. Training Ground Beta. Where we did the battle trial orientation. If you don't show, I'll hunt you down. He didn't wait for an answer. He just turned and walked away, his hands stuffed in his pockets. Izuku's blood ran cold. This wasn't a challenge. It was a summons. Bakugo wasn't looking for a fight. He was looking for answers, and he was fully prepared to beat them out of him. He knew he should say no. He should tell a teacher. But he also knew he couldn't. This confrontation had been brewing for 10 months. It had been brewing their entire lives. It was inevitable. Later that afternoon, he stood in the cavernous expanse of Training Ground Beta. The fake city street was silent and empty. The memory of the entrance exam, of Uraraka trapped under the rubble, was still fresh. He heard the heavy tread of footsteps and turned. Bakugo entered from the other end of the street, not in his gym uniform, but in his full hero costume, The grenade-like gauntlets, the black tank top, the metallic collar. He was taking this seriously. So you came, Bakugo said, his voice echoing in the large space. Good. Saves me the trouble. Kaken, what do you want? Izuku asked, his voice trembling slightly. Bakugo ignored him. He began to walk forward slowly, a predator closing in. I've been thinking. All day. Trying to make it make sense. The sludge villain. The entrance exam. That ball throw today, it doesn't add up. You were a quirkless, worthless Deku your entire life. A bug? And now you have a quirk that might be even more powerful than All Might's. That doesn't just happen. He stopped about 20 feet away. So here's the deal. You're going to tell me everything. Right now. Where did you get that power? Who gave it to you? And if you lie to me, I'll know, and I will beat you into the ground until you're telling the truth from a hospital bed. Izuku's mind raced. He couldn't tell him about One for All. It was a sacred secret, a burden shared only with All Might. He couldn't tell him about the fruit. It was too insane, too unbelievable. Any answer he gave would be a lie. It's my quirk, Kaken, he said weakly. It just manifested late. Bakugo's eye twitched. A late manifestation? You think I'm an idiot? A quirk doesn't just manifest with enough power to change the weather and take out a 50-story robot. That's a stockpiling quirk. It would have had to have been growing your whole life. You would have shown signs. You were lying then, or you're lying now. He was too smart. His analytical mind, the same one that made him a genius in combat, was piecing together the impossibilities. I'm done talking, Bakugo snarled, a manic grin spreading across his face. He lifted his massive gauntlets. If you won't tell me, I'll just have to force you to use it. To use your full power. I want to see it. I need to see what it is I'm up against. I need to see the power that you thought made you better than me. He crouched, small explosions popping in his palms. The air grew hot. I'm going to win, he declared, his voice a low, terrifying promise. That's what heroes do. The rage in his eyes wasn't just about rivalry anymore. It was the rage of a king whose throne had been usurped by a peasant, the rage of a believer who had discovered his god was a fraud, and it was all directed at the boy who had been his shadow for his entire life. The battle was about to begin, not for points or for grades, but for the fundamental truth of their shared history.